The enemy missiles hit at 0400 hours, turning Alpha Base into an inferno. When Commander Phillips arrived with the rescue team 6 hours later, he expected to find casualties and chaos. Instead, he found Medic Lieutenant Zara Angel Morrison standing beside 18 rescued soldiers, having single-handedly evacuated everyone while the base burned around her. The first missile struck the communications tower at exactly 4:03 a.m., sending a pillar of fire into the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Zara Morrison was in the medical bay conducting routine inventory of surgical supplies when the explosion shattered every window in the building and threw her against the equipment cabinet. The base alarm system managed one final warning before the second missile destroyed the command center, killing the duty officer and plunging Alpha Base into chaos. Zara picked herself up from the medical bay floor, quickly assessing her situation. The building was structurally damaged but still standing. Outside, she could hear the distinctive whistle of more incoming artillery and the panicked shouts of soldiers scrambling for cover. The third missile hit the barracks, and Zara felt the concussion wave through the medical facility's walls. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid failed, casting eerie shadows across the treatment rooms. The first wounded soldier stumbled through the medical bay doors, his uniform torn and bloodied from shrapnel wounds. Behind him, 2 more soldiers supported a third who was unconscious and bleeding from a severe head injury. Zara's training kicked in automatically as she directed them to get him on the table and apply pressure to the wound. More wounded soldiers began arriving as the missile barrage continued. Each explosion brought new casualties and made the medical bay more dangerous as structural damage accumulated. Ceiling tiles fell, pipes burst, and the smell of smoke began filtering through the ventilation system. Corporal Jackson, a radio operator who'd made it to the medical bay with minor injuries, reported that the whole base was getting hit. The command post was gone, fire control was gone, and he thought the medical bay was the only building still standing. Zara looked around, mentally cataloging her resources and the growing number of wounded soldiers who needed immediate care. The facility wasn't designed to handle this many casualties, and the ongoing bombardment made normal evacuation procedures impossible. Zara instructed Jackson to help move the seriously wounded to the basement storage area, which was more protected. When he asked about evacuation, Zara looked through the shattered windows at the inferno outside. Vehicle wreckage burned throughout the compound, ammunition stores were exploding in chain reactions, and enemy artillery continued falling with methodical precision. She told him there was nowhere to evacuate to right now and that they were staying until help arrived, and she was keeping everyone alive until that happened. The basement of the medical facility had originally been designed for supply storage, but its reinforced concrete construction made it the safest location in the building. Zara organized the evacuation of wounded soldiers while continuing to treat injuries under increasingly dangerous conditions. Private Williams reported that the roof was starting to collapse in the east wing, and Zara told him they needed to move faster. When she asked how many more were upstairs, he said there were 6 walking wounded and 3 stretcher cases. Zara made rapid decisions about treatment priorities while coordinating the movement of patients to safety. Her medical training included battlefield triage, but she'd never applied it under conditions where the battlefield was her own medical facility. The artillery barrage continued for another hour, each explosion bringing down more of the base's infrastructure. Zara worked in the basement with flashlights and emergency medical supplies, treating everything from minor shrapnel wounds to life-threatening injuries. The wounded soldiers ranged from Private Chun, who had suffered a severe concussion when the barracks collapsed, to Sergeant Martinez, whose chest injury required immediate surgical intervention using improvised equipment. Sergeant Torres called from the basement entrance with a problem. The whole building was on fire now, and smoke was getting bad upstairs. Zara looked around the basement at 18 wounded soldiers in various conditions. Some could walk, others needed stretchers, and several required continuous medical attention to stay alive. She told Torres to check the ventilation shafts for an emergency exit that should lead to the vehicle maintenance area. When he pointed out that area was on the other side of the compound and everything was burning over there, She said they were going to have to go through the fire. Zara's evacuation plan required moving 18 patients through a burning building across a compound under artillery bombardment to reach the only shelter that might protect them from the continuing assault. The emergency exit from the medical basement opened into a tunnel system that connected various buildings on the base. The tunnels hadn't been designed for patient evacuation, but they provided protection from the artillery fire that was destroying everything above ground. Zara announced to the assembled wounded soldiers that they were moving to the vehicle maintenance bunker, which was underground and should protect them from the bombardment. Walking wounded would help carry stretcher cases, and nobody would get left behind. Private Chun raised his hand despite the bandages around his head and asked what if the enemy had ground forces moving in. Shouldn't they be trying to establish defensive positions? Zara looked at the young soldier and told him that right now their mission was survival, and if enemy ground forces showed up, they'd deal with that when it happened. The movement through the tunnel system took 45 minutes, with Zara managing both medical care and logistics while leading 18 wounded soldiers through underground passages that were never intended for this purpose. The tunnels were narrow and poorly lit, requiring careful coordination to move stretcher cases without causing additional injuries. Zara had to monitor her most critical patients while ensuring that the walking wounded could maintain the pace necessary to reach safety. The vehicle maintenance bunker was a large, underground facility designed to protect armored vehicles from air attacks. It provided space for the wounded and protection from the ongoing bombardment, but it lacked medical equipment and proper lighting. Zara set up a makeshift medical station using maintenance equipment and emergency supplies. Her patients required everything from minor wound care to complex surgical procedures, and she had to improvise solutions using tools and materials designed for vehicle repair. The artillery bombardment continued overhead, each explosion reminding them that enemy forces were systematically destroying everything on the surface. But in the underground bunker, Zara maintained a medical operation that kept 18 soldiers alive under impossible conditions. Chun reported that he was getting weak radio signals from outside, and it sounded like rescue forces were trying to coordinate a response, but they were having trouble getting through the artillery barrage. When Zara asked how long until they could reach them, he said it was unknown, could be hours or could be longer. Hour after hour, the bombardment continued. Zara worked without rest, moving between patients, managing pain medication, monitoring vital signs, and making life or death decisions about treatment priorities. Sergeant Torres called out that they had a new problem. He thought he heard vehicles moving around up there. Zara stopped her work on Private Martinez's chest wound and listened carefully. Above the sound of continuing explosions, she could hear the distinctive rumble of tracked vehicles moving through the compound. She said it was probably enemy ground forces checking for survivors. Zara made rapid calculations about their tactical situation. 18 wounded soldiers in an underground bunker with limited weapons and no communication with friendly forces. If enemy troops found them, they would be captured or killed. When she asked Torres what weapons they had, he said 4 rifles, limited ammunition, and whatever sidearms the walking wounded still had. She said that wasn't enough to fight off a serious assault and they needed a different plan. Chun reported that he was getting something on the radio. It sounded like Commander Phillips with a rescue force, but they were still several hours away. Zara said several hours might be too long, and if enemy forces were moving through the base, they'd find them eventually. She organized the bunker's defenses while continuing to provide medical care. The walking wounded were positioned to cover the entrance while the stretcher cases were moved to the safest area of the facility. The enemy search of the base took most of the night. Zara and her patients could hear vehicles moving overhead, voices calling in foreign languages, and occasional gunfire as enemy forces cleared buildings and eliminated any remaining resistance. Private Williams whispered from his position near the bunker entrance that they were getting closer. Zara checked her watch. It was 20 hours, 10 hours since the initial attack, and they were still waiting for rescue while enemy forces controlled the surface. The sound of footsteps on the metal stairs leading to the bunker entrance made everyone freeze. Enemy soldiers had found their hiding place. Zara whispered to her patients to stay quiet and let her handle this. Foreign voices echoed down the stairway as enemy soldiers approached the bunker entrance. Zara positioned herself between the entrance and her wounded soldiers, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether 18 American soldiers lived or died. The bunker door burst open, and 3 enemy soldiers entered with weapons raised. They stopped when they saw Zara standing in the middle of what appeared to be an improvised medical facility. One of the soldiers asked in broken English if she was an American doctor. She identified herself as Lieutenant Zara Morrison, United States Army Medical Corps, and said these were wounded soldiers under her care. The enemy soldiers looked around the bunker, noting the makeshift medical equipment and the obvious severity of some patients' injuries. They spoke among themselves in their own language before their leader told her to come with them while the soldiers stayed here. She said she wasn't leaving her patients because they needed continuous medical care. The enemy soldier raised his weapon toward one of the wounded Americans and said she would come now, or they would shoot the wounded soldiers. Zara understood that she was facing an impossible choice: abandon her patients to save herself or refuse, and watch them be executed. She told them to wait. She'd come with them, but she needed to stabilize her critical patients first. She asked for 5 minutes. The enemy soldiers agreed to wait while Zara made rapid preparations for leaving her patients. She gave emergency instructions to Sergeant Torres and arranged pain medication for the most seriously wounded. She told Torres that Commander Phillips was supposed to arrive with a rescue force and he needed to keep everyone alive until he got here. When Torres asked what if they were taking her to be executed, she said then he was in charge until help arrived and to take care of their people. Zara was escorted from the bunker by enemy soldiers who seemed more interested in capturing a medical officer than harming wounded soldiers. As they moved through the destroyed base, she could see the full extent of the damage from the 10-hour bombardment. Every building was either destroyed or burning. Vehicle wreckage littered the compound. The communications tower was completely gone, and smoke rose from ammunition stores that were still exploding intermittently. The enemy forces had established a temporary command post in the only building that remained partially intact. Zara was brought before an officer who spoke better English than his soldiers. He introduced himself as Major Petro and said she would provide medical care for their wounded soldiers. She said she would treat wounded according to medical ethics and the Geneva Convention, but she had wounded soldiers in that bunker who needed immediate care. He told her that her wounded soldiers were now prisoners and they would receive medical care when convenient. Zara understood that she was being held as a medical asset while her patients were essentially hostages. The enemy's plan was to use her expertise while maintaining control over the American survivors. She told the major she needed to return to her patients because several of them would die without continued medical attention. He said she would treat their wounded first and her soldiers would wait. Zara was escorted to another building where enemy forces had established their own medical facility. Several wounded enemy soldiers needed immediate surgical attention, and her captors expected her to prioritize their casualties over American wounded. For the next 4 hours, Zara provided medical care to enemy wounded while worrying about the 18 American soldiers she'd left in the bunker. Her medical training required her to treat all patients regardless of nationality, but her loyalty was to the soldiers who were depending on her for survival. At 0600 hours, exactly 6 hours after the initial bombardment, the distinctive sound of American helicopters approached the base. Commander Phillips had arrived with the rescue force that Chun had been trying to contact all night. Zara told her captor that those were American aircraft. The major said yes, and now they would negotiate for the lives of her wounded soldiers. The rescue operation became a standoff between American forces and enemy troops who were holding 18 wounded soldiers hostage. Commander Phillips established a perimeter around the base while negotiating for the release of the American survivors. The negotiation continued for 2 hours while Zara provided medical care under enemy supervision. Her patients in the bunker were running out of time, and she knew that several of them would die without immediate treatment. She told the major she needed to check on her patients in the bunker because they'd been without medical care for 6 hours. He told her she would remain there until negotiations were complete. Commander Phillips's voice came over enemy radio communications proposing a prisoner exchange. He said they had wounded enemy personnel who needed medical care. When the major asked what he proposed, the commander said medical personnel and wounded from both sides would receive immediate care while they arranged prisoner exchange, with Lieutenant Morrison returning to treat American wounded and enemy medical staff treating their wounded. The agreement allowed Zara to return to the bunker where she found 18 American soldiers in various stages of medical crisis. Several had developed complications from their injuries. Others were suffering from shock and dehydration, and all of them needed immediate attention. Torres reported that Martinez was critical because his chest wound had reopened. Williams had developed a fever, probably from infection, and Chen had been unconscious for the past hour. Zara immediately began emergency treatment while coordinating with Commander Phillips for medical evacuation. The rescue helicopters could only land if the standoff with enemy forces was resolved peacefully. The prisoner exchange took another 3 hours to arrange, but it finally allowed medical evacuation of all wounded personnel. Zara accompanied her patients to the rescue helicopters, ensuring that everyone received appropriate care during transport. Commander Phillips watched as 18 wounded soldiers were loaded onto medical helicopters, all of them alive because of Zara's work during the 10-hour bombardment and 6-hour captivity. Commander Phillips told Zara that what she accomplished was extraordinary, that she kept 18 soldiers alive under conditions that should have killed everyone. Zara looked at the burning remains of Alpha Base, understanding that she had experienced something that would define her military career and her understanding of what medical service really meant. She said she just did what any medical officer would do and kept her patients alive. The commander told her that not every medical officer could have done what she did, that she turned a disaster into a rescue operation. The flight to the field hospital took 2 hours, during which Zara continued providing medical care to patients who had survived because of her expertise and determination. Every soldier on those helicopters owed their life to her refusal to abandon them during the worst night of the war. Commander Phillips's after-action report would document one of the most remarkable medical operations in military history. A single medical officer who had managed to save every wounded soldier under her care. During a 10-hour enemy bombardment followed by 6 hours of captivity, the intelligence gathered from the rescued soldiers and Zara's observations during captivity provided valuable information about enemy tactics and capabilities that would be used to prevent similar attacks on other American positions. 6 months later, Lieutenant Zara Morrison was promoted to captain and awarded the Silver Star for her actions during the defense of Alpha Base. Her medical techniques under extreme conditions became the subject of training programs for military medical personnel worldwide. But more importantly, 18 soldiers returned home to their families because one medical officer understood that her duty was to preserve life regardless of the circumstances surrounding her. Today, Major Zara Angel Morrison trains military medical personnel in battlefield medicine, teaching them that the most important medical principle is the determination to save lives when everyone else has given up hope. Her students learn that medical service isn't just about treating injuries. It's about making impossible decisions and taking extraordinary risks to ensure that everyone under your care survives to go home. Zara's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest victories come when we refuse to quit even when survival seems impossible. The enemy forces who thought they could destroy Alpha Base learned that some medical officers are more dangerous than any weapon, especially when they're protecting the soldiers who trust them with their lives. Zara Morrison didn't just save 18 lives. She proved that the most powerful weapon in any army is a medical officer who refuses to let anyone die on their watch. Short the story to 20,000.